Okay, Diego, I will go ahead and pass it off to you and let you introduce the language justice statement, and then we will enable interpretation.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. I'll give the instructions in English, then go into Spanish. Voy a dar instrucciones en inglés y luego las repito en español. So good afternoon. I'm Diego Poncio with the CLC. I'll be your interpreter for today's call. After I give these instructions in both languages, the host of the meeting will activate the interpretation. At that moment, you're going to see a globe icon that will say interpretation. That's going to appear there in the bottom right-hand corner of your computer screen, there on the toolbar. You'll select that globe icon that says interpretation, and you will choose your preferred language. If you're joining the meeting today on your cell phone or tablet, please look for the More button or the three dots button to select your preferred language this other way. And if you are not fully bilingual, I strongly encourage you to select your preferred language so you can listen to the interpretation in case anyone speaks in the opposite language and you would like to know what they are saying. If you are bilingual, my recommendation as always is to not select the language channel. That way you don't have to hear my voice as the interpreter and you don't have to worry about switching back and forth on your device whenever you decide you want to speak a different language. As always, just please pay attention to the speed in which you're speaking. Just please don't pick up your reading speed. And if you have any questions, you can let us know through the chat. So thank you so much. Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Yo soy Diego Pons. Estoy aquí hoy con el grupo El COC. Voy a ser intérprete para la reunión de hoy. Cuando termine de dar esas instrucciones, se va a activar la interpretación. En ese momento va a aparecer un icono, un globo en la tierra, que va a decir interpretación, que va a aparecer ahí abajo en la derecha de su pantalla. Usted va a seleccionar ese icono globo de la Tierra y va a elegir su idioma preferido. Si hoy está asistiendo a la reunión en su celular o en su tableta, busque por favor la opción que dice More, M-O-R-E, que quiere decir más, o posiblemente un botón de tres puntos ahí en la esquina de su pantalla, lo cual le va a permitir a usted elegir su idioma preferido de esta otra manera. Si usted no es completamente bilingüe, yo le voy a aconsejar que elija su idioma preferido para que pueda utilizar la interpretación cuando alguien está hablando en el otro idioma. Si usted sí es bilingüe, yo le recomiendo que no elija ningún canal de idioma para que no tenga que escuchar mi voz como intérprete y no tenga que estar cambiando cada vez que quieran hablar un distinto idioma. Si tienen alguna pregunta, déjenos saber por el chat. Muchas gracias. Ready to go?
All right, Diego, I'm adding you in. We should be good to go, everybody. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chef Jessica Wright, and we are all gathered here today to share about a research project that we launched back in 2023, the Farm to Loading Dock Landscape Assessment. And our time together will be filled with a quick overview of our research project and different legislative efforts that informed our project and/or support implementation of the varying recommendations we identified. Along with this, we want to give you all an insider's look at some of the lessons learned when passing and implementing legislation that can hopefully support you all with the efforts you are taking on in your states. Basically, don't make the mistakes we did. And we want to highlight some of the ongoing considerations that we keep front and center as we take steps forward towards creating resilient and local food systems. Our research project, the results, and the recommendations are woven throughout this entire presentation, and we look forward to having you all come alongside us in our journey. We'll go to the next slide. So here's a quick review of our agenda today. After our opening, we will briefly review the research project. Then we thought it was important to call out the unique fiscal constraints our state faces. From there, we will dive into those lessons learned from passing and implementing legislation and those considerations that we keep coming across. And finally, we will close with some next steps that we are taking in Colorado and ideally leave 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Lily to introduce everybody.
Hello, everyone. My name's Lily Lake, and I work for the Colorado Food Systems Advisory Council. I'm really excited to be here today and have the pleasure of introducing our amazing presenters. We've just heard from Jess Wright, and we'll hear next from Libby Christensen, who works with CSU Extension and the Northwest and Rocky Mountain Regional Food Business Center. We're also joined today by Tabor Ward with the Donnell K Foundation, Wendy Peters-Moschetti with Nourish Colorado, as well as Marion Kalb from the Denver Department of Public Health and the Environment. While we don't have time for individual introductions on such a large call, we wanted to take a little time here at the beginning of the webinar to show everyone who's in the room today. This first map shows webinar registration from across the US, and we're so thrilled to have participants from all but 6 states today and to see such strong nationwide energy around farm to loading dock research and initiatives. On this next slide, we've included a pie chart to give you a snapshot of where folks on this call are most engaged in the food system. You can see we've got the most people joining from nonprofit organizations and state agencies here today, but excitingly, every food systems role offered during registration is represented on the call. And then finally, our last icebreaker question on the registration form asked, if you could be an edible plant, what would you be? As you might expect from a call full of food-focused people, there is an incredible selection of plants represented here. You can see we have lots of beets, dandelion, nasturtium, okra, and arugula in the room today, just to name a few. So thanks to all of you who shared that so we could have this colorful representation of everyone joining us today. This next slide provides a quick reference for some of the programs and organizations we'll be discussing today, including whether they're funded at the state or federal level. While I won't go through each acronym in detail now, we'll explain many of them as they come up throughout the presentation. Please feel free to take a screenshot of this page if it's helpful to have on hand, and don't hesitate to drop any questions in the chat as they come up. With that, I will pass it over to Libby to help set the stage for today's conversation and dive deeper into the farm to loading dock research.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lily. Really excited to be here. My name is Libby Christensen. I'm the statewide food and ag specialist with our Colorado State University Office of Engagement and Extension. In addition to that role, I also serve as the co-lead for the Northwest and Rocky Mountain Regional Food Business Center here in Colorado. And so one of the things that we wanted to just get started with was thinking about where we started with this farm to loading dock report. So in 2023, we saw a major change in the fiscal landscape within our state, and I would assume that that was true for many of you representing other states across the country. We had the influx of resources from the federal government in the form of the Regional Food System Infrastructure Grant, which is really targeting middle of the supply chain investment. We also saw the introduction of the regional food business centers across the state. There were 12, or across the country, there were 12 of those centers identified across the country. And then we also had these other kind of short-term pilot programs that were really prioritizing the purchase and sourcing of local and regional products. Some of those were defined within a state. Otherwise, they were defined within a certain geographic distance of the purchase location. And one of the things that was really unique here in Colorado, and we'll spend a lot more time talking about, was the passage of Proposition FF, the Healthy School Meals for All bill in 2022 by our voters, which provided universal meal program, a local food grant program that provided money and resources to school districts to purchase local and regional products, as well as a grant program for increased capacity of our food service workers. And so what we saw was that there was all of this interest in money and resources in this space, but there was a lack of coordination, collaboration, and communication across these partners and organizations that were actively involved in the passage implementation of these projects. And so what we ended up doing, next slide, was hosting a conversation in April of 2023, where we brought in some of the key individuals and organizations that were involved in managing and coordinating these efforts into a room and started having a conversation where we could talk about what was the funding source, what was the sustainability of that funding source, what were the funds available to be used for, were there funds available for administrative purposes, for quote unquote technical assistance, purchasing a product, and what were some of the rules and regulations around those purchases, as well as what did data collection look like, reporting look like, because we were starting to hear from both the buyers as well as the sellers that there was a significant amount of, or not a significant amount, but there was a burden associated with reporting of those different things. So we wanted to bring everybody into a room and just have that conversation. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was a real need for additional research that many of the questions that we identified in those conversations, we didn't have enough information to answer those questions at that time. And so that's what we took away from that event in April. And so next slide, we decided to put together a research team that included many of the individuals that are on this call today. That included the Colorado Food System Advisory Council, which is a governor and General Assembly appointed council that also includes representation from some of the key state agencies that were involved in implementing these policies, as well as the Donald K. Foundation, the City and County of Denver, CU Boulder, the Colorado School of Public Health, and CU Denver. And with that group of researchers, many of them graduate students, we ended up putting together a list of all of the organizations and government programs that were identified as providing technical assistance in some shape or form to either the buyers or the sellers or the intermediaries involved in this institutional procurement landscape. And we ended up identifying 72 individuals that were somehow actively involved in either funding or deploying this technical assistance. We ended up interviewing 38 of those individuals. We identified 11 food hubs in our state that were actively involved in this process of moving product from sellers to buyers. We interviewed 10 of those individuals, and then one of the graduate students really honed into a very small geographic area and talked to a group of producers that were actively selling into one school district, just as a kind of a case study to start fleshing out some additional ideas and concepts. So next slide. One of the things that we first came across is trying to figure out, how do we define technical assistance? And we started with one definition and ended up getting to this one, is really a really broad range of services and supports to individuals, businesses, communities, and organizations that are involved in institutional procurement here in our state. And that assistance is really intended to help them make better informed decisions, adopt better production business practices, navigate the regulatory environment, and improve their overall operation and the relationships that lie therein. So on the next slide, we've got just kind of a categorization of what we saw people were kind of thinking about when they were talking about technical assistance. And what we see is that there were 8 different categories that were quite broad that all fell under this much larger umbrella. And so we added some additional information about what did we mean by these different categories. And then we went back to the people and asked them how to prioritize this different forms of technical assistance. So on the next slide, we brought everybody back in December of 2023, where we had a chance to share what we had learned during these conversations. We extended the invitation to all of those that had participated in the first event, but then also included all of the individuals that participated in the interviews. And we coincided this event with the statewide Colorado Food Summit, which opened up participation to additional individuals that might not have come to our state capitol for just this event, but were coming for this other larger event, so that we could get folks from southwestern Colorado, northwestern Colorado, southeastern Colorado. And it gave us a chance to provide an update and a share out of what we had learned, get some feedback on the research that we had done, and identify next steps. And one of the big outcomes was really establishing priority areas for technical assistance moving forward, and recognizing that that was a very different financial fiscal reality than we currently face. But it's still, when there's times of plenty and when there's times of frugality, it can be really important to think about, how do you prioritize either too many resources and how that's kind of allocated, or too few resources. So we're using this as we kind of move forward. So on the next slide, we highlight the 4 key priorities that we identified during those conversations. And then I'll post a link in the chat box about the full report. But these were still some of the top gaps and recommendations around increasing the availability of accessible, accurate, and detailed Colorado food purchasing data. We'll hear more about that later in the presentation today, just about how important it is, if you have a lot of resources or very few resources, if you don't have enough information to make smart decisions, it really inhibits your ability to make changes, because the uncertainty, and also that there are so many assumptions or myths that are embedded in our food system. that without information about pricing and quantity and sizing, that it's really hard for individuals to make informed decisions about how and when to sell their product or how and where to buy their product. There was also really this need to coordinate and increase awareness of Colorado food and agricultural technical assistance offerings. Just the sheer number of that 78 different organizations or programs that are around supporting food and ag businesses. While we continue to hear that individuals that are struggling or just new to this space need a lot of support, and so having multiple avenues or connections is really important for their holistic improvement and being able to thrive in this space. Navigating that landscape and figuring out who should I go to about what, when, and where are they located? Will they come to me? And understanding that has continued to be a challenge. And so in that information can't reside within any one individual, that we need to figure out how to get that out to folks in a way that is accessible and usable. And that is one thing that we continue to struggle with. Another is really supporting regional, responsive, and statewide connected value chain coordination. So one of the key things we heard from all of the interviewees is that it's not just preparing and minimizing barriers for the buyers and the sellers, but it's really having individuals that will continue to make the effort to do the follow-up, that no matter how much technical assistance you provide, there's always going to be hiccups. And you need individuals, be they food hubs or really passionate food service directors, to continue to grease those wheels and continue to make those connections. And it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing, repeated, continuous effort that is necessary for the success of these types of connections. And so that really needs an emphasis of energies. And then finally is just this physical infrastructure. We heard time and time again from both buyers and sellers that the way products come out of the field are just really difficult for institutional buyers to utilize. I think this is something we all know, that we've heard time and time again. And so a real need for expanding this fruit and vegetable processing capacity. So we came up with these amazing recommendations, but we all know that there are limited time, resources, energy to prioritize them, and that they all exist within a real landscape. And so we wanted to also pass it off to Tabor Ward to share a little bit about the fiscal constraints that we face here in Colorado when thinking about either reallocating funding for different types of projects or expanding availability of resources.
So we know this is, hi, I'm Tabor Ward, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Tabor, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights in Colorado. We understand that this stuff costs money and takes time and resources, and we have those same fiscal constraints here in Colorado, mostly from how our tax system works. So I wanted to just cover a little bit of Colorado Taxpayer Bill of Rights, so folks have a sense of our constraints here in Colorado. So 1992, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights was passed by statewide ballot majority. And it really put in place a strict tax structure that we have in Colorado today, which really severely limits state and local government's ability to raise and spend tax revenue. And this is by design. It's a way to really limit the size and growth in government. And there's a lot of things that Tabor does. And some of these have resulted in Colorado having a budget deficit this year of about $1.5 billion, which has meant a lot of cuts to our own budget and has made it really hard to implement some of these programs over time. And so I wanted to just walk through a couple of things that Tabor does. The first is you have to have voter approval for any tax increases. So Tabor mandates that any tax increase must be approved by voters in a state referendum or ballot measures, which also means legislators do not have the ability to raise taxes or to enact policy that would increase taxes. And this applies at both our state and federal level. So the way this plays out in some of our programs, like Healthy School Meals for All, our Universal School Meal Program, when we didn't have enough money to fund that program, we couldn't go back to the legislators and say, hey, could we just add some more money to that program, please? We have to pass another voter ballot to raise more money for that program. So if our funding falls short, we have to go back to the voters and ask for more money again. Limits to revenue collection. So Tabor sets a limit on the amount of revenue the state government can collect and spend in any given fiscal year, and this is called the Tabor cap. And this limit is tied to a formula based on population growth, inflation, and any revenue collected above this limit must be returned to the taxpayers. We get this Tabor refund, which a lot of folks really like. Again, we're seeing that with our Healthy School Meals for All. We collected more money for that program, about $12 million more than we had in our Tabor cap. And so that money would get returned to the voters, but instead we're putting another ballot to the voters this year so we can keep that 12 million in this program because it's already underfunded. This limits tax options. So Tabor dictates what kinds of taxes may be used to raise revenue in Colorado. It mandates a single rate income tax and prohibits graduated income taxes, local income taxes, a statewide property tax, or new or increased real estate transfer taxes. And finally, it sets election provisions. So Tabor elections can occur in both odd and even years, whereas non-Tabor related elections can only occur in even years, which again makes things complicated in our state to raise money for these really important programs. So we just wanted to say we understand the fiscal constraints folks have, and it makes it really hard to run these programs unless you have a source of money you can come to at the table. Here's how we want to fund this program and move funding around at the state level. So just wanted to cover a little bit of that. So a lot of our programs, we do need to go to the voters and get their support in order to fund them. So I'll pass.
Oh. Thank you, Tabor. We'll go to the next slide, Lily. Thank you. So the first piece of legislation we wanted to share about is the local food program. And this bill was passed in 2019 after a year-long research and stakeholder process. And while we initially tried to pass something that could be statewide, it was too expensive for the limitation of our state's budget. So we pared it down into a bit of a pilot program. One key thing we focused on is not only providing money for districts to purchase Colorado grown, raised, or processed products, but to also provide funding for training and technical assistance, effectively starting to build a case for services that can now be considered value chain coordination, one of those farm to loading dock recommendations. And since its inception, we've had 44 unique school districts who have participated, with $2 million being invested in Colorado's producers over the 4 years that it has been running. We've also invested $750,000 in this training and technical assistance piece, with over 700 food service employees, producers, and partners receiving direct on-site support and/or a formal workshop. And support looks like things such as recipe development, purchase planning, producer connections, culinary skills training, marketing and promotion, small equipment grants, among many other things. And it is worth noting that this program was slated to only run for 3 years, and we've successfully advocated for it to continue for 2 additional years, even with the financial constraints in our state. Local Food for Schools is bipartisan. Now on to some of our lessons learned. Next slide. Okay. So here are some of the lessons. And it's also worth noting that the local food program was my first experience in creating and passing legislation, and I've learned quite a bit since then. Before my time spent supporting districts with scratch cooking and using more fresh fruits and vegetables, I worked in restaurants. So this whole policy world has been quite the learning curve for me. But I'm a bit crazy and meticulous, most chefs are, and have actually found that those skills translate well into the policy world. Our first lesson learned is that when we had to scale back our initial request from a statewide program to a grant-based one, we didn't specify that we wanted the same number of providers over a period of time. That would have allowed us to do case studies and document the level of technical assistance that each school district needed and how that support that they received strengthened their local purchasing efforts. We went from 16 providers in the first year to now over 34, and that technical assistance contract has not increased. Along with this, I very quickly learned that words matter in legislation, and there is very little to no wiggle room sometimes. In our first year, because we didn't specify at least or minimum in the funding formula, our Department of Education was unable to expend the full amount of money available, leaving close to $85,000 on the table. And we quickly fixed that. It also became apparent that tying the funding formula to meal counts does work, but our smaller school districts, those small rural ones feeding 50 to 100 students, they would end up with between $300 to $500 to spend on local foods. So we added a minimum allotment in. Another thing we are struggling with is that the legislation does not require tracking quantity data, only total dollars spent. And so while I may know that our districts are spending $10,000 on carrots, I have no idea how many carrots were purchased. And it becomes hard to truly quantify the value of this program without that data. And even though quantity data can be messy, this is something that still needs to be included. We also feel that it's very important to be clear with your intent. We are always of the mindset that change takes time. And if districts can source local from larger farms through their broadline distributors, that's a win. However, many of those larger farms have consistent market channels available to them, and we are really looking to shore up our small and mid-sized farms. If the intent isn't there in the legislation, then there really isn't anything driving that forward outside of us annoying nonprofit orgs pushing for it. We also found out that businesses were saying that they were Colorado proud when they weren't exactly Colorado owned and operated. They may have a packing plant in Colorado, but they are actually headquartered somewhere else. This led to companies such as Frito-Lay trying to pass themselves off as Colorado proud in that very first year. And we also immediately addressed that and clarified it for our participating providers. We'll go to the next slide. The other one is in 2022, Hunger Free Colorado, they led this ballot measure for healthy school meals for all. And this launched in school year 23-24, and we've had universal meals for 2 full years, where over 600,000 free meals are being provided each day. This is incredible. And as Libby noted, this legislation was designed to be comprehensive with all 4 components: free meals, local foods funds, substantial training and technical assistance plus equipment grants, and staff wages and stipends, all working together. And my main role was around weaving the local food program pilot in and how it functions into this expanded Healthy School Meals for All legislation. The catch is, this legislation wasn't really designed in a way that ensured all 4 components worked together. So when cost exceeded revenue, everything but free meals was paused. And this led to our legislation calling the grant programs ornaments and viewing them as expendable versus as reimbursement enhancements that move the needle forward on achieving the healthy part of free meals for all. And because of Tabor, as Tabor Ward has described, even though this program brings in more revenue, the voters voted on about $100 million. So anything above that must be returned to the taxpayers. So Hunger Free is returning to the ballot this November with 2 separate ballot measures. One, to retain extra revenue above that initial $100 million, and 2, to raise additional money, because even with the retain passing, it is not enough for universal free meals, let alone any of the additional enhancements promised. And we'll go to the next slide. So if I could turn back time and give you all some solid advice if you want to do something similar. The truth of the matter is, if all components are meant to work together, they cannot be separated out, because that gets us to where we are in Colorado today. And a few other states are experiencing similar situations. So if I was starting over in a new state, first, do the math and some deep research. Listen to your stakeholders, especially those who feed kids every single day. Game out multiple scenarios and do your due diligence. And along with this, as a coalition, set your values. What do you want to see out of this legislation? Is it free meals for all? Fantastic. Do you also want to support local farmers? Excellent. Do you want to see more scratch cooking? We love it. Are you looking for a well-trained staff? Any of these, identify them and set them. And once those are in place, identify what it would cost per meal to achieve all of those core values. Then identify your funding mechanism and how much money could actually be brought in. And if it isn't enough for all districts to participate, craft a plan to roll it out in phases while ensuring every core value can be met from the start. I'll pass it over to Wendy to share about other legislative efforts.
Great. Thanks, Jess. And hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Peters-Moschetti, Executive Director at Nourish Colorado. And I'm going to talk about 2 additional pieces of state legislation that we at Nourish, along with thousands of partners, have worked on over the past few years that are good examples of how state policy can be used as a tool to contribute to this sort of, ecosystem in which local and regional food systems can thrive. And we think these are good examples of state policy and how state policy can be used to direct more tools and resources to growers and distributors and buyers, and ultimately to consumers. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Community Food Access Program. This program sits at the Colorado Department of Agriculture and was created through 2 different bills in 2022 and 2023. The overall purpose of this program is to improve access to and lower prices for healthy foods in low-income areas of the state, specifically by supporting small food retailers. So throughout this, when I talk about small food retailers, in the context of this program, whom I'm talking about as we defined it are small farms, food hubs, farmers markets, and small independent Colorado-owned retailers. So the sets of food retailers who are in community, selling food to their communities and located in or serving low-income and low-access areas. The overall program has 3 main components. One are small business grants, one is a consortium, and the third are tax credits. So the first piece, the small business grants, are what kicked off first after 2022. And these were funded by the federal ARPA dollars, right? So this infusion of federal pandemic relief dollars allocated to states. So we knew going into it that those funds were going to be really time limited, and the state would have only a couple of years to use those dollars through the small grant program. So that small grant program actually has concluded now, as have all ARPA funded programs. All told, by the end, the department issued 116 small grants totaling $5 million in 42 of Colorado's 64 counties. So a couple things about those small grants. They were written specifically to be small, accessible, low barrier to entry grants for those set of food retailers to cover the costs of doing business in community when you want to be able to provide fresh, perishable foods. So think lots of grant applications for like cold storage, right? And other infrastructure and operating costs. The second piece of the program is the consortium, which is really a peer group of those food retailers who can come together in peer learning. They have access to additional tax breaks to cover costs of distribution, and they have formal relationships in terms of pricing agreements with certain food hubs in the state of Colorado. The third piece is the tax credit piece. I'm happy to talk offline if anyone who wants to know more about this wonderfully wonky tax credit program that was brought to us by a very wise legislator to continue this program to 2030. Essentially, if you are an applicant, small farm, small retailer, you can receive a refundable tax credit that's worth up to 75% of the cost of a large equipment purchase. So if you purchase that cold storage or a tractor or a freezer truck, you can claim 75% of the cost of that as a refundable tax credit. So what we learned along the way, as I mentioned, the original program was ARPA funded, federal relief funds funded to the Department of Agriculture. I wish that we had really had time as a federal government, as a state government, as advocates to understand the ins and outs of that pandemic relief funding. There were certain timing and reporting requirements and rules and regulations that just were very different from other programs that the state was running. Similarly, I wish we had also had time to really build out a structure with the implementing agency, the Department of Agriculture, so we could build a program together that really fit with the Department of Agriculture and their current staffing and current programs they did. Instead, it was a lot of learning about getting this totally new stream of federal funding and creating a whole new program at the same time. We did do a bit of this, but throughout, I think there could have been more opportunity to really define who's in and who's out of this program. We had to define in statute, what is a small farm? What is a small independent retailer in Colorado? And I promise you, not everyone was pleased with our definitions. And actually, some of those around small retailers, we did have to amend through a later bill process to be more inclusive of other size of retailers. We did want those initial grants to be very low barrier. So we started off with a smaller amount. The department eventually did increase those small grants up to $50,000. They were trying to spend money pretty fast and also really needed to be more inclusive of the real costs that retailers especially were experiencing. Ideally, we could have started by building a permanent state program, especially for those grants. But as Tabor described about Tabor, those federal pandemic dollars are now gone, and we're very limited as a state in terms of additional revenue that we can seek to continue a small grant program. So right now the grants are done for now. Overall, however, focusing on small, independent Colorado-owned businesses was a winning bipartisan issue. And in 2022 and 23, we did have Republican and Democratic support. So next slide. The next program I'm going to talk about is a little bit more straightforward. The Healthy Food Incentive Program, it's money. It's a line item in the state's general budget. So back in 2018, Nourish Colorado worked with our joint budget committee that writes our state's budget to put a line item in the budget that was written very broadly in terms of its cash from the state to buy fresh Colorado grown produce for low-income households. It was really that simple. So since then, it first launched in 2019, it's been used to purchase over $3 million in local produce for low-income households. At the time, when we worked with the JBC to write this, it served us well to kind of slip it in there and fly under the radar. And initially, it was written as a footnote to a line item of the state public health departments like cancer and cardiovascular disease prevention line item. So, and we got it in there and it served us well, but over time, as we wanted to continue to advocate to say tweak that or bring more money to it, it became very confusing. Even legislators that supported it didn't know what it was or where it was or what is this food access money sitting in this cancer prevention line item. So ultimately we did, through a bill process, elevate it to its own standalone program status and its own line item in the budget. A few things I also wish that we would have clarified early on is the ability to use state money for forward purchasing, right? So we have used these state dollars to do advanced purchasing, to purchase community-supported agriculture, CSA shares from farmers. It's great for farmers, great for eaters. And we've had to be very careful and dance around a little bit how we discussed or billed or reported on when and how we spent money. And we should have just clarified and legally in the first place that we could do forward purchasing. We also ran into a few interesting gray areas legally with the state. They came to us and said, well, you can only spend state money to buy food for legally documented citizens in Colorado, something we would not and could not document. So eventually we did compromise with the state and that we could use these dollars to purchase food for participants of a federal nutrition benefit program. Also, as we sort of expanded the program and continued to work specifically with like CSA farmers and weekly distribution, wonderfully, farmers they're putting in more into their weekly produce boxes, right? They're throwing in eggs and meat and dairy, which is great, but we have state money that says it's to be used for produce. So we've had to set some boundaries around, say, like over the season, at least 75% of your deliveries need to be produce, for example. Again, overall, this focusing on purchasing Colorado-grown fresh produce has proved to be a really winning bipartisan issue. We've had Republicans and Democrats on the Joint Budget Committee that year after year really stand up for and protect this program. And then lastly, writing this so broadly has served us, and I think the state of Colorado, really well, and that it's fresh produce for low-income households. So we have used it to, say, fund SNAP incentives like our state's Double Up Food Bucks program, or something totally different like purchasing a CSA share for a WIC mama or an older adult. And that ability to be really responsive and flexible for both farmers and eaters and what works best in their community has really served us well. And I'm going to pass it back to Jess.
Awesome. Thank you, Wendy. So as we move into the section and we start discussing the ongoing considerations, I want to reiterate that none of this work happens in isolation. Everything truly is connected, and many of the top gaps and recommendations from our research are informing our efforts around the state and the various considerations that we keep facing. We cannot invest in one side, such as giving K-12 institutions money to buy local, without also investing in our agricultural producers to ensure they have the capacity and the resources to sell to those K-12 institutions. And our goal in Colorado is to make farm to K-12, food pantry, food banks, hospitals, corner stores, etc., the loading dock, the easy choice. And we have found that it can be the norm, but it still takes work. So how do we go one step further and make it the easy choice? And we are using programs such as the Local Food Program, data from the Local Food Purchasing Agreement, Community Food Access Program, various federal grants, and other initiatives in our state to inform strategies here. There will be a poll after this slide where you will get to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 whether or not this consideration is a brand new concept to you or something that you are actively tackling. I want you to keep this in mind as I provide a touch more detail. So first, through our work with the Local Food Program, we are supporting districts in understanding what true success looks like while providing strategies to help them achieve that. What does a successful farm to school program actually look like? Is it one purchase a year on Colorado Proud School Meal Day? That's a step, but let's be real here. That is not something our producers can rely upon. We are laying a foundation so that when districts are developing their purchasing plans and menus for the following school year, they are first thinking, what is available locally to me throughout the school year that fits my budget, my menu goals, the equipment available to me, and the skill level of my staff. And then everything else follows. And this concept applies for others who are building their Farm to programs. Next, building in accountability and sharing risk when putting out local food bids. There are instances where local food bids are being awarded to a food hub or a local producer, but then that full amount awarded isn't actually being purchased. So if I'm a farmer and an institution awards me a bid for 10,000 pounds of carrots, but then only purchases 5,000 pounds, that negatively impacts my business and my perception of working with that institution. We need to build more education and awareness and accountability here and not expect our producers to be the only ones left holding all of that risk. And one thing we are testing through a federal grant is a regional local food bid, where the buyers are aware that if they commit to 10,000 pounds of carrots, we are expecting them to purchase as close to that amount as possible. And if they can't, have clear, open lines of communication as to why. This may be tedious work, however, it is worth it. Third, balancing advocating for these local food purchasing incentives alongside other competing priorities when the state's budget is already overspent. Sometimes this message of institutions are committed to continuing to buy local even without additional local foods funds creates a narrative where these kinds of programs aren't needed. And the thing is, those institutions who are in that place, they have spent years building their system so that they can do this. But that reality isn't the norm for every institution, let alone food banks and small retail stores. The money and resources from these programs are what help these entities get to that place and also creates the conditions for those reoccurring, stable, consistent local food purchases throughout the year. Next, I already talked about the need for accurate purchasing data, and I want to reiterate this. We've done a lot of great work to share the dollar impact of the local food program, and we have even built a database that shows the flow of local food from farm to these participating districts as a step towards addressing that data gap in our research. However, quantity data is needed to round things out, and without it, we can only do so much. And we also need to know the source origin, which can be hard to collect when working with our larger distributors. And finally, timing. One of the recommendations in our research surrounds fruit and vegetable processing. Well, we need accurate data for that and committed buyers in order for a business to want to invest in minimally processing local food and or creating value-added products that use local foods. Collecting that data takes time when we know that we need these items like yesterday. We are slowly tackling this through another federal grant that has us doing a market analysis for value-added products so that we can get the data, show demand, and then develop a product. So it's going to be time for the poll, and I'm going to launch it. And remember, you all are rating this on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 means this is something that is brand new to you, i.e. you've never thought about the importance of tracking quantity data, or 5 means this is something that you are actively tackling this and you have strategies in place that maybe we could actually learn from. I am launching the poll, and I'll give you all a minute or so to fill it out and wait till we have like 60%, 70% participation. I'll give us about 30 more seconds to wrap up before I close the poll and share the results. A nice benefit of Zoom polling is we're going to be able to see your answers. So, and who said it. So if you happen to have solutions for us, there's a good chance we'll be reaching out. All right, I am going to go ahead and close the poll. No worries if you did not get time to complete it. Just for reference, there's some of your results, and after this meeting, we will also share them out as well for you all to have a nice little summary of all of them too. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide to continue talking about considerations because there are many. Okay, so this one surrounds one of our key research recommendations around value chain coordination. Same situation here. We will do another poll after this as well. So first, how do you actually quantify the value of technical assistance? Through our research, it became apparent that everyone has different evaluative processes to measure their impact, if any, and frankly, technical assistance just isn't as sexy or as tangible as providing money to buy local food or equipment. And the impact from technical assistance is something that may not be immediate and actually takes years to show a tangible return. Secondly, that leads to this next piece about capacity, both financial and time. Many of the providers we interviewed are grant funded to provide technical assistance, or they are going above and beyond their normal scopes of work to do this with very little to no funding. They are strapped for time and money. And on the flip side, the recipients of these services are also in a similar boat. We also know that turnover is real, and that's why surface level support that may happen once or twice can only do so much. We know the will is there to purchase local foods, supporting our farmers, and providing tasty meals for our consumers. However, this work takes time to build. It makes perfect sense to invest in value chain coordinators who can help expand people's capacity to do this, helping to facilitate that process of moving food from the farm to the loading dock and ultimately into the hands of Colorado's consumers. And next, part of addressing this last point involves investing in that year-over-year customized support, those relationships. This is not a one-touch opportunity for us. This is continuous, dedicated work. The training and technical assistance component underneath Healthy School Meals for All is designed to be able to offer that support to K-12 districts and producers, which is why we're actively working on fully funding that program. And I'm also envisioning a part of that contract to be able to support value chain coordinators across the state. And ultimately, we want to take our lessons learned now and collect data so that we can continue to expand these programs to other institutions and entities who want to grow their Farm to efforts. And finally, we can develop all the toolkits and resources in the world that we want. However, we need to ensure that they are actually being used. A great resource that our Department of Education created is a local food solicitation to support districts who want to do their own bids. And I'm now looking to see who's using that resource and how helpful they are finding it. We've also developed the Colorado Local Food Program Guidebook, which is chock full of resources. And I'm currently training people around the state on how to actionize the guidebook with the intent that it'll be used by future value chain coordinators in our state who are supporting K-12 producers, K-12 schools, producers, and community members with growing or expanding their farm to school efforts. So I'm going to launch poll number 2 for you all. And I already shared the results for that one. Okay, here we go. 4 questions, same scale, 1 to 5. 1, brand new to you. 5, actively tackling this. Give everyone about 30-ish seconds to be able to wrap up, and then we will share the results. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, share the results, talking myself through this. This is fascinating. Okay, all right. I'm going to pass it off to Mary and Kel to talk about some next steps, and we are close to wrapping up in time for Q&A. And pop them into the chat so we can answer them at the end of this webinar meeting. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jess. And I just absolutely love that word, actionize. I'm Marian Kalb with the City and County of Denver. And as we think about next steps and how to actionize our lessons learned from the Farm to Loading Dock study, we will be using those lessons learned to further the purchase of Colorado products by state agencies and institutions. And we have an institutional procurement working group, which is a committee of folks from the Colorado Food Systems Advisory Council that Libby mentioned a little earlier. And we're focusing on local purchasing, specifically by state agencies, and trying to understand the best mechanisms for achieving this. We're currently in research mode. We are developing relationships with state procurement officials, with food hubs, and with distributors. We've also talked with folks in other states that are doing this work and what their experiences have been. What we know from others and from our own experiences is that really, in order for this to work, we need to gain the buy-in of everybody involved as we proceed with local purchasing. And we know this can be a win-win in a policy sense. We want this to be a win-win in terms of working with all of the different people that are involved here. So one of the questions that we're looking at is the ever-present question of how to achieve data transparency. As Jess mentioned, it's been hard to figure out quantity or amounts purchased. And so one of the approaches that we are considering is to work with existing data, because purchases are being made. Clearly, the data exists. How do we access this existing data and determine the points of contact for data collection? Again, those that exist, in order to create a system that shows where products originate and where the source location is, along with other necessary information. And so this work that we're doing is really a multi-year approach. By 2027, we hope to weigh the options of how to best increase local purchasing by state agencies. It may be through state policy. It could also be a small p policy through contracting or through a regulatory change. And once this has been decided, we'll begin our action planning with state agencies to increase those purchases from Colorado farmers and ranchers.
Awesome. Thank you, Marian. And I will wrap us up. So the key points here are, if you're looking to create a program, a project, or a policy, who will be impacted by it? And how are you involving them from the very beginning to ensure that implementation is as smooth as it can be? An idea is only as good as its execution. And it also doesn't seem like we're actually going to have a farm bill this year. And we also know that child nutrition reauthorization keeps getting punted year over year. However, it is still very important to know who your representatives are at the federal level and at the state level. We've also provided a lot of links here to different organizations and news feeds that'll keep you in the loop and notify you when it is time to act. And finally, I do want to give a special shout out to the National Farm to School Network State Policy Tracker. This is like my Bible, y'all. It tells you every piece of legislation that has been introduced, passed, failed, etc. by state, and it is chock full of ideas and resources. We'll move to Q&A. We've done all right on our time. All right. And we'll pop them into the chat. And Lily, do you want to facilitate them and we can answer as a team?
Happy to. Let me just stop sharing my screen so we can see everyone.
Awesome.
Just reading through the questions, and I saw Adrian's question. Have you evaluated produce growers regarding how competitive pricing is from state agencies and institutions versus private sector buyers? I don't know, Libby, I can see you responded, and Wendy as well, but if you want to address that to the wider group at all.
Yeah, Adrian, this goes really to the heart of Jess's point about the need for quantity data as well as higher quality on the categories. So we, with the Farm to Loading Dock report, we have this data available. But you can see that currently, so this was for the local food pilot program, and it's actually one of the better sources of data. And this is for 1 year that we had information about apples, and we had the quantity that they were purchasing and the price per pound. That is not collected across the board across these programs. So there's a huge amount of it's hard to aggregate the data across the different programs because the way that they're reporting. So for the Colorado Cooperative Food Purchasing Program, that one just has fruits and vegetables kind of as a much bigger category. And so and I'll just say this entity purchased $10,000 worth of fruits and vegetables. So it's nearly impossible to disaggregate or to understand how much of apples and what type of apples and what was the pack size, which gets a little bit to the point of the question about processing. Is like, in what format are these folks purchasing their product? Because it's really different if it's 100 count versus a 60 count in terms of the size of the apples that are in that box. So the other thing to notice from these responses is that there's a huge range. So some of our producers are clearly engaged with these marketplaces partly out of a social good, but also potentially a lack of technical assistance and understanding the price of the product that they're selling. So they might be undercutting their own prices. So like the idea of selling apples for 82 cents a pound can be kind of challenging to believe in understanding what that particular situation of that producer. But you can see that there's a pretty broad spectrum of the pricing. And that some of these producers are charging a pretty high price. And this was because, at least with the local food pilot program, it was funds on top of their available dollars for procurement. And so food service directors had a level of flexibility and comfort with, in some instances, paying a higher price. Like for one example, some of our rural school districts were purchasing whole animals from a rancher in their community. And so they might be willing to pay a higher premium because that person is also part of the community. They might come in from some educational pieces in addition to just providing that product.
Thanks so much, Libby. I also see a question in the chat about whether institutions can help with purchasing seconds, or what the role of institutions might be with helping producers sell some of the seconds or odd shapes and sizes.
And I'll tag on to this. We know institutions have expressed an interest in this. It's also, I think, a challenge because of at least for our school meal programs, they need reliability. Those kids are showing up to eat lunch that day no matter what. And so they need something that they can plan on. And that's why they tend to rely on some of the broadline distributors or even consistent relationships with food hubs and a local producer. So the seconds are more of a bonus. And generally, those tend to require a bit more processing, breaking down, turning something like softer peaches into a peach puree, the labor, the equipment, the time attached to it. It just keeps snowballing. And quantities as well. If it's only a few cases and this is a large school district, it may not make sense for them. So that comes down to the relationships and needing people such as value chain coordinators who can actually help and say, hey, there's seconds available. These are the institutions who would be interested in it, and helping to facilitate that connection and support the process of getting those seconds onto the menu in a way that makes sense for whatever that menu item is.
I see another question in the chat about prioritizing purchasing from small-scale Colorado producers and whether someone can speak to food safety requirements and coordination around that.
I'm happy to share about this and also happy for Libby to jump in as well. On the school side, there are no federal regulations that our schools can only purchase from farms that are GAP, Good Agricultural Practices, or GIP, Good Handling Practices certified. They just need to have a food safety plan. So a lot of our training and technical assistance involves shifting away this mindset and basically changing people's habits to where they have always required this and actually getting them comfortable with talking to the farms, visiting them, understanding where there's commonalities with what's required on a farm, such as clean hands. We need that in our school kitchens as well. Clean surfaces. We need that in our school kitchens as well. Creating a sense of familiarity with this and providing resources so that our producers can have. CSU has fantastic farm food safety plan resources that we link out often to be able to use and show you have a food safety plan, you develop that relationship with that producer, you visit their farm, you can tell that they're doing right by the products and ensuring they're handling it with the utmost care so that when it gets to your door, that loading dock, you can feel confident that you're getting the best quality product that has been handled safe across the entire board. It's changing habits, y'all. That's what it is.
I can also add that things are, if you're looking at other institutions like hospitals or some educational systems, that particularly if they're going through a third-party vendor to manage the food, that those food safety requirements will be a little bit stricter. And what we do is generally try to hook people up with the food service management company or the distributor to figure out what those requirements are, and then try and figure out how to meet those requirements.
Just to also speak to the question from Becky about tracking who's using your resources. And I think Jess spoke a little bit to it in terms of website, who's downloading or being on your platform. Another thing that we've done with the Northwest and Rocky Mountain Regional Food Business Center, which has been pretty new to us, but finding out that this is similar to what they've been doing up in Montana for a couple of years, is they essentially have a business intake form at the start of the connection between the technical assistance provider and the business that's seeking that support. And then they complete kind of a form. They then use a customer relation management software to track that individual through the process. And then we're sending out surveys every 6 months to find out how the experience with that technical assistance has benefited or not benefited their business and what additional support they would like or seek to have. And I think has been quite a lift to develop it in the first place, but we're using it across all of the programs that we've been supporting. So we've been doing shared kitchen workshops to individual business plan development programs. And so it's kind of getting to what Chef Jess mentioned about the lack of evaluation data or impact data for a lot of these technical assistance providers. It's allowing us to provide some kind of comparison across programs for very different types of programs that are being offered.
And I'll add on to Libby. Our efforts through the local food program as the training and technical assistance contractor are not as sophisticated as what Libby's team is doing, but we do send out a technical assistance survey to all of our local food program participating providers towards the end of the school year. And since this guidebook is relatively new, we've added in questions to try to identify which resources are the most valuable to you, which ones are you actually using more often than not. And so that's a little bit of our intermediate step to try to understand where people are going and what's really mattering to them.
I think we've been able to get to most of the questions in the chat. I'm just scrolling through to see if I missed any, but Jess and Libby, definitely jump in if you want to expand on any of the ones that you got to in the comments.
I can at least share for Becky's, I think it was Becky, yes, who was asking about buyer accountability with the local foods bid. So we had launched a regional food bid for Southeast Colorado, and we're very close to awarding a vendor, but with some of the challenges that were happening at the federal level with, are there going to be changes to community eligibility provision, the loss of the local food for schools funds, uncertainty about healthy school meals for all in our state and the local food program in our state. The K-12 buyers who are part of this bid, that also included older adult meal programs and rural grocers, wanted to press pause. And I was actually really okay with this because they understood throughout the entire process of doing this together that, again, they're going to be committed to buying the items that they specified in their bid. And part of our next step after awarding the bid to the vendor would be to have every single buyer sign an MOU that effectively had a 3-part process for if you are experiencing issues with the product, issues with delivery, here's how to handle that part of accountability. And then part of my role would be to basically go and
I thought you were
track
shopping.
and be able to say, hey, school district A, you said you're going to buy those 10,000 pounds of carrots. I've been talking to the vendor. It's almost halfway through the year. What's happening? What's your plan? And if they're struggling, be able to go on site and say, we're going to help you identify recipes to be able to use those carrots and put them on your salad bar and ensure that you're getting as close to what you need. And just continuing to track what type of technical assistance is needed to also help facilitate that process and where does that breakdown in communication come from. So we're trying again this fall because I'm determined. So that's coming soon. We'll keep y'all updated. And yeah, as Libby noted, we have like 30 more seconds if there's any additional questions. This has been recorded. We'll send out an email next week to all attendees and everyone who registered with the recording, data from the polls, the PowerPoint presentation, and additional links as well and resources for you all.